Web3 Unpacked is proudly published by Movement, a leading design consultancy that specializes in Web 2 and 3, strategy, design, branding, creative content development, and content marketing. We help companies ensure that their brand and business remain differentiated and competitive in a rapidly evolving digital landscape. To learn more, please visit mvmt.media.
Welcome back to Web3 Unpacked, everyone. And today we're happy to have Max Howell, CEO of Tea, join us today. Tea is a cross-platform, open-source package management system, and Max and his team are on a mission to fix open-source development. Welcome, Max.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And thanks for being here. You've got an interesting product, really, interesting. I've used these type of services and products in the past, and you guys are approaching it a little bit different. So I'm excited to hear what you're up to and kind of what's your runway and what's it all about. Before we get started, though, I always like to ask our guests, how did you get into Web3 or crypto? How did it start for you?
It started just before Tea, I have to confess. I had a friend who was trying to get me into crypto since 2013 or something, and every so often he'd phone me and say, "Hey Max, you got to get into Ethereum smart contracts. You can make $500 an hour," or stuff like that. And in the end, I listened, and he got me into this developer DAO, not the developer DAO, a different one, and I started looking into what was going on in that space. And while exploring it is when I had the idea for Tea, which we started about 2 years ago. So I am kind of new to it, I'm ashamed to say. I ignored it like many for a while, but now I've seen the light, I gotta say, and love everything in this space.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It's very different, and it's a complete mind shift for a lot of people. And it really doesn't matter when you get into it. If you're, a technology forward person, you just have to kind of make that mental leap and go for it. I mean, there's different languages to learn and all that stuff, but it's all good. With that said, we all have our own personal reasons of kind of what tipped us over the edge and kind of what we're doing now and beyond. What does it mean to you personally? I always like to ask this one too.
Well, by far the most important thing for me personally with this endeavor is attempting to fix how open source is appreciated in this world. It's a well-known problem that open source at this point powers like so much of our software stack, so much of the internet, so much of modern tech. And people have tried to fix the fact that it's not compensated in any way for a long time. And, people have tried it in a Web3 way as well. Like Gitcoin is obviously a very successful thing. But fundamentally, open source is different. And that's why fundamentally I feel that it's never really, none of these other solutions have really succeeded, where we're approaching it in a more, in a way that reflects the nature of how open source works better. Like open source isn't a typical market. It isn't something that you can just slap like normal capitalist ideas on top of. Fundamentally, it's a system of free software. So we've devised a system that we hope will allow that incredibly valuable marketplace that hasn't actually had its value recognized to be correctly attributed.
Mm. Yeah, and I think the key words here are, open and source. So, and there's so much to kind of unpack just on that topic alone. We talked to a lot of open source developers, from how the software is engineered, how it's disseminated or, released, down to how people are managed within your ecosystem. So that really interests me, actually. So why don't you kind of tell us a little bit about Tea and really what makes it unique and different and what our listeners should kind of look for?
Yeah, so for me, look, I've always been into open source, which is why I fell into the Web3 area so easily. I find that it was very similar. It's very similar to how I remember software being when I first got involved in it professionally, which was like 2004-ish. And like the space was full of people who were in it for building what they hoped would change the future. And Web3 feels the same. Sorry, what was the question?
I was asking kind of really what makes this different in a world with, you know, Apache, Bundler, and Yarn and all these type of different products. What sets you aside? Like, what sets you apart? What makes you unique?
Well, so you know, I created this open source product called Homebrew back in 2009, and it's one of the biggest open source projects that's ever existed. And it was that thrust me into this space where I was suddenly working a huge amount of my time on these free pieces of software that the world then took and used. And in that time, like Web2 turned up and then built everything on top of open source, and then we got this like fundamental issue where people maintain all this stuff in their free time and they can't exactly afford it. So I came to the realization that a package manager is fundamentally aware of the complex interactions between all the different pieces of open source. Well, there's tens of millions of packages, and the part of the stack that knows how all that works, which bits are important, which bits are fundamental pieces but they're buried deep and nobody really knows about them, but someone's still maintaining that thing, someone's still putting all this work in. And so you could apply that on top of some sort of blockchain or a set of smart contracts or build a protocol. This was like how I envisaged it 2 years ago. And then you sort of have a tool that understands the value of that ecosystem. And then if you could just like make sure the token flows through it, you can go to all the right pieces, as well as making something that doesn't like have like direct purchasing involved, right? Like that's what I mean when I say that open source is a different kind of ecosystem. A lot of people hear what I'm doing and they assume that you're going to have to pay like a tenth of a cent or something to install Node. And, you know, like, maybe that system would work. I don't think it would. I think people have tried that. Like, if you look across the Web3 space, trying to fix how open source is rewarded is something that a lot of people have tried, and Gitcoin is probably the most successful, right? But I don't think, personally, bounties are the final solution for fixing this problem where people want to be working on this software full-time, and the world needs them to, right? Like, so many security holes in open source. Probably the only people who know about them are the people exploiting them, and the maintainers aren't properly incentivized to actually fix that stuff. They don't want their stuff to be insecure, right? But they have a full-time job and kids and house payments, and like they need to be able to pay for all that. So it's not incentivized, but so. You know, our approach is unique. One thing I hear all the time is that from people who aren't into crypto, like obviously I can relate because I wasn't particularly into it. You know, I got a $5 Bitcoin donation back in 2012 for my open source. That was like one of my first intros to it. The guy was like, "You got a wallet?" And I was like, "No, better go and find out how to do that." And so it was $5 then, and I sold it at the last bull cycle. So did alright. Can't remember what the percentage increase. You can figure it out. But like people who aren't into it still, especially because like there's such a bad rep, are like, this is like the first project I've heard of that makes sense to me. Like I can see how. Using cryptocurrencies makes sense. I can see how Web3 technologies fit onto this concept, onto this idea, and also why you can't really do it with normal currencies, like with central banking. So I feel that we're building something that hopefully will be a kind of bridge for all the Web2 devs and all the Web2 people. Well, not all of them. The people who understand what open source is and understand the software industry. Hopefully, will be something which makes it clear that this is just a technology with use and utility, and not just a thing where rug pulls and scams happen. I compare it to email, right? Because I think some of the first people who were making money with email were the scammers, and let's face it, there's still a lot of scams going on in your junk box. The technology, however, we figured out how to make it useful, debatably useful. I think email is one of the worst of the Web 1 technologies, really. But yeah, we've become dependent on it. It proved its utility. We just had to figure out how to extract that utility and make it so it wasn't overwhelmingly bad actors.
Right. Yeah, I mean, email being, a basic tool, but it does get exploited, right? And, that happens every single second of the day, actually.
Yeah.
And as we start to kind of unwrap this technology that you're building, you mentioned people joining the team, an open source team, to help develop this product, right, or project. Now, if I join the project, am I starting a node? Do I have to start a node to actually do it? And is that how it works? Hundreds of thousands of nodes kind of serving and acting as validators, and then it's actually indelibly inked and or approved via the blockchain. Is that correct?
No, not really. I thought it would work like that initially, but we've been designing this thing for over a year now. Still possibly will be nodes. Oh yeah, there will definitely be nodes at some point in the future, but we're starting off with a single oracle that computes what we call T rank, which is the rankings of all the different open source projects. And there's millions, right? Probably 20, 30 million open source projects, if you dedupe some of the crap that's in NPM and Cargo at least. But we've currently got, I think, 10 to 15 mil in our database, and the Oracle will compute the rankings on a daily basis. And initially there'll just be one, but over time that will decentralize, and we will hopefully have people running nodes. But the main users of the protocol won't have to do so. Even the open source maintainers, because of the Oracle, you'll sign a piece of text into your GitHub or GitLab or whatever kind of Git repo you're using, signed against the wallet, and we'll use that to identify where token flows, essentially. And then the non-open source users of the protocol will mostly be steeping, we call it, which is effectively staking, but because we're not going to be running our own layer 2, it's not really. So we call it steeping, and they steep against the packages in the graph. There'll be incentives there to make sure that you try to pick ones that aren't too popular, because it's a problem. But it isn't that much of a problem with our system, because every epoch when we generate the rewards, a percentage goes to the people steeping and a percentage goes to those projects that they steep, and then that is split off again each time with the smart contracts, so that it is given to all the dependencies. And so one of the problems with open source is the sheer number of packages, and the fact that this is why we need package managers. It's kind of the thing that you shouldn't need, but we built this complex system that's ever more complex, so you need tooling to manage it. That's part of the reason sponsorship doesn't work right. It's because your average app is 6,000 or 7,000 different open source packages. How are you going to sponsor all those packages without some sort of layer of automation? And again, people have tried to create those sort of layers of automation. The problem is incentivizing all the projects to participate. And what's in it for them? And we're bringing all these extra benefits, like governments and the fact that we will be heavily marketing you as a participant in the project. So it's, you know, when I started it, I was like, could this work? And like every month I'm like, it's gonna work. Just slightly more. And so we're hoping to release the incentivized testnet later this year. So it's getting close.
Yeah, and you hit on something. Your overall message here is you just got to go for it. I mean, you do want strategy and obviously architecture to be in place, but in the world of Web3, there's not one way to do it. You can do it lots of different ways. You can use different types of tokenomics if you're using that, or tokens and arbitrage systems and staking or steeping, which I like, very on brand, by the way. So it's really kind of interesting there. There is one other point that I wanted to bring up, the idea of, I'm forgetting it, but I'll get back to that. But I love this statement that I've seen floating around, and Tea is one of the first legitimate use cases for blockchain technology. That's a pretty heavy statement there. You know, just as
I apologize to our listeners. My marketing team wanted to say that. Like, I know there's other good legitimate uses. It's just that to a lot of people who are outside the industry, they haven't understood those uses, and ours resonates in a way they understand better. Sorry,
but I do like the analogy that they were making, you know, and this is where I was headed. And it's, you know, just as the US dollar was backed by gold, you know, you guys are building an economy backed on code, which is really cool. How does that work? I mean, is it, you know, I think you kind of went into it a little bit, but, you know, the backing the dollar is such a common, you know, it's part of all of our lexicon these days. You know, how is code backing up your network?
Well, the way we built it is to recognize that there is huge value in all this open source software. It's just that nobody's figured out a way to recognize that value and express it before. You know, by building it on top of a package manager so it understands that network and that graph, but also giving people the opportunity to actually build on top of that value using our protocol. It's this recognition which I think is unique in our approach. Like, you know, over the last 10, 15 years that I've been involved in software, open source went from being something that people thought was stupid and never gonna like be a big important piece of anything, to running just about everything. Like, when I first got into open source, Linux was a hobby project for almost everybody, but people believed it was going to go somewhere. Of course, it's still always the year of the Linux desktop, but Linux completely slayed in every other way, like being on like just about every phone that's out there. Like, obviously, FreeBSD's on Apple's, but Linux on everything else, and like most devices nowadays. And, like, open source has just spread wide, and now it's impossible to deny how vital it is to the world. And yet, it's a flaky industry, effectively, because nobody figured out a proper monetization strategy. There's a few commercial open source, which basically Tea is, right? Because we took VC. But like I keep saying, if Tea existed, I wouldn't have taken VC for Tea. We want to make a system where it is possible for people who build open source to find an avenue through to making it work for them without it having to like go off and beg VCs for money or beg for donations, by expressing the value of open source on top of a protocol.
Yeah, speaking, obviously, continuing to speak about open source, one of the books that I encourage everyone, as soon as it comes up on the podcast, to read is The Cathedral and the Bazaar. If you haven't read that one, I'm sure you have. But fantastic. It goes into Linux, open source, the importance of it, how it got started, and, you know, beyond. It's fantastic book. Completely changed my view of things. You know, we live in the world of what I call, not so much anymore, thanks to guys like you, but the walled garden wall. Like, everything's closed off, everything's hermetically sealed. There is a better way. There is a faster way and a better way, a cleaner way to develop open source code. One of the things you brought up before with package management, it is about automating your code workflow and your work process. How, or if you, I don't even know if you are, but are you guys using AI any way, in any shape, to automate?
So probably will. I'm still building out some of the fundamentals, and like a lot of our priorities right now are on the protocol side of things. But we have the GUI, as we call it, which is like the graphical version of the command line tool, and in that we've focused on all the new AI tools that have been coming out, so you can use them. How we might use it inside, there's a lot of possibilities. I just don't want to copy what everyone else is doing. So probably I'm going to run create a lang chain which reads all the manual pages of all the tools, so you can ask inside the T GUI for like how to use different get a recommendation on what open source to use and things like that. But there's a lot of that out there. I'm waiting for like something a little more unique before I apply it. In terms of like AI on the protocol, probably not. It needs to be. We need to know how it works. And let's face it, no one really understands how these AI agents work, which is like a sci-fi dystopia right there. But I don't see anyone. Well, someone's probably going to put AI in a protocol somewhere, right?
Mm.
God help us all.
well, yeah. I mean, it's like any other tool, and it's the bright, shiny new thing out there. It doesn't mean you have to use it, right?
Oh, no.
A lot of people use it for supply chain and just kind of every kind of automation type of scenario, but it doesn't mean you have to use it. And you're right. There has to be a really good reason. You have to really understand it, and it is a different type of tool set or knowledge set.
I think a lot of people are adding it to things that it doesn't make a huge amount of sense to, because it's a great buzzword right now and it will get you some press, but I've never been a believer in that. Like, it has to make sense to me. I've implemented things in my life and then just thrown them away when I couldn't figure out how to find the fun, as I call it, which... I got that quote from some British games dev, I forget his name, but he said that he would like come up with ideas for games and then spend the first few months just finding the fun, basically iterating on like the core gameplay loop concepts that he had until the game was fun. And if it wasn't, then he'd abandon it, which I think a lot of people are scared to abandon work.
Well, yeah. I mean, look, I'm cut from a creative cloth, and it's extremely emotional for developers and creatives to let go of their ideas, especially if they're self-funding or coding something and they're putting a lot of effort into it. And I love that term, find the fun, because it all, I spent years working with Nickelodeon. I built hundreds of games for them, online and standalone, first persons. And you do find out through level design if it's a valid idea, and are you telling a good story, and is it entertaining for your audiences? So I really like that. One quick question, bouncing back to GUI. GUI is GUI the open? Is it like an open wiki, like a wiki that people contribute to, or a knowledge base, or is it a knowledge base and a marketplace?
Well, it's just a graphical user interface for the command line interface. I've often felt that with developer tooling and quite a lot of different tooling, like there's two ways to use it, and done well, you've got a great command line interface and you've got a complementary graphical interface, which maybe has some more advanced features in some ways, but they shouldn't just overlap each other, which I think is something a lot of people do when they build out one or, both. It's like usually with open source, especially because it's developers who don't have great user interface design chops, they just take the literal command line interface and put buttons on a screen and go, done. And then they're like, why doesn't anyone want to use it? Well, it's because you've just literally engineered a piece of shit. And So I try to make something which complements like the command line interface for open source, and in that respect, it's like an app store, right? I felt that there's just so much awesome open source out there that very few people know about, because the way to access it is through brew install, and like a lot of people hate the terminal, especially new developers. Like nowadays, they do not want to start with the terminal. They don't even want to start with an app. They want to go straight to something in the browser if possible. And then maybe eventually they get back to the command line, because it is absurdly awesome. Like, I think everyone who ends up at the command line at some point or another like learns to love and hate, but overall love it. So, I felt that there was an opportunity there, and I really like what we built. Like I was saying, we're focused on the local AI stuff, because I don't think anyone else is, right? Like, I kind of laugh when I see like stuff in my Twitter feed, which is like, someone's like, I open sourced a new AI app, and then you look into it, and it's like 80 lines of code, and then a call to OpenAI's API. And it's like, is this really open source? Like, it's just a open source user interface with a proprietary, God knows how it works, call to OpenAI under it. So I really like the local AI stuff that people have been working on. It's not as capable as OpenAI's GPT-4 for sure, but it's surprisingly close a lot of the time. So we've put a lot of time into emphasizing those. So you open up our app, and like the first page is like a discover page essentially for what is going on in local artificial intelligence. And I love the fact that everything you do in it stays on a computer. You can ask it anything you want, and nobody else is ever going to know apart from you and the agent. If the agent can remember.
Yeah, absolutely. And you bring up some really interesting points, and command line versus GUI. And obviously I'm a graphic guy. I've spent most of my career designing interfaces and working with developers. And you basically outlined, day one of the web itself to modernity right today, which is developers are used to command lines. They're used to having lines of code and language do the work for them. And it's ironic how AI, or conversational AI, is starting to kind of bring everyday normies into that command line world, right? Understanding different syntax or language to use to get different results within a text field, whether it be graphical, audio, or video, or whatever you're doing, or code now. Build a website in 3 seconds. It's interesting from a design perspective how we're kind of migrating back. And this is something, as a designer, most of my career it has been, I can't wait for the, interfaceless interface, right? And I throw that at people, and they're like, what the hell is that? It's like something that you talk to.
I thought the same.
Yeah.
Like, what is the ultimate way to interact with anything? It is the voice. That's why, as people, we talk, and we don't, prod each other.
Exactly.
Right. So I've thought that for a long time, that it was interesting to me that on Star Trek they had so many buttons. It just didn't seem like there would be. It would be, I just imagine, mostly content, and then you talk with the interface to adjust that content, because that's what a UI is still going to be good at, is showing things visually. Like, your eyes process data, I think it's like 12 gigabits a second or something. It's still a fantastic way to get data into your brain. It's just that language it's so interesting that we found AI through language, right? Like, that made me think about it for a while. It's like, is there something about language that is intelligence? Is intelligence just language? And like, yeah, kind of, right? Kind of is, makes sense.
Yeah, and ironically, the last AI type of scenario to be developed is really natural language, which is the actual you speaking or voice recognition. It really is still not where it should be to get that Star Trek, that idea. And by the way, Star Trek, depending on your age, that was super futuristic. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
but I
it's funny
completely
how
agree.
wrong it was.
Yeah, I think I often I like cars, driving them, fixing them, hot rodding them, doing whatever. But one thing that always irritated me in contemporary cars is the button setup or the lack thereof, right? So you go into a Tesla, it looks like a Tesla cockpit for one of their SpaceX programs, which is really cool. Like you sit in the seat, they don't do anything. You're on autopilot, basically. And you've got a big fat flat screen, right? Now you go into a car, and to me, initially it felt sterile, right? I needed something. So there's the cross between doing something with your hands and being very tactile, and just maybe even talking to it. So voice commands in a car is a no-brainer, basically.
Especially because like people don't mind talking in their cars. Like one issue with voice interface, of course, it doesn't matter so much now. We're all remote. But when we were working in offices, like, I couldn't imagine like everyone talking to their computers all day. It would just feel stupid. But in the car, it's fine. Like let's talk about cars. Like their UIs, apart from the wheel, right? The wheel and the pedals, like that was good design. But everything else, like God, reaching for the radio and almost killing yourself. And like all these touch screens that are turning up on everything nowadays, like the worst possible place for them is the car, for God's sake. So you have to take your attention off the road, absolutely.
Yeah, I completely agree. And one of my, I always joke around with people. I'm like, what's your favorite interior? Are you talking cars? And it's like old school, late '80s Porsche 911. You know why? It was a tin can. It had a radio, maybe, and that was basically it. And maybe it had heat, and maybe it had AC. But it was an engine. It connected you to the road, and that's why you bought that car. I mean, it depends on what story you want to tell and how you want your users to use your products. So just interesting design, chatter, things I think about along the way. And it's very applicable here, and it's what we're seeing now. And I love the idea of like the entire world is going to command line. It's not just,
Yeah.
developers. It's funny.
It's pretty great. Like, I barely use Google anymore. I just use ChatGPT and various other things. I got AI in my editor, and I got few other. Like, just too many. For a bit, there was months where there was just too many. I was like, God Almighty, are we ever gonna get on top of this? But I something slowed down a bit. I'm still waiting for like some killer AI apps though. But something will be coming along in open source for sure.
It's funny, I guess it was about 10 months ago when everything started to kind of blow up with AI, publicly, I should say. And was having several conversations with colleagues and friends about it. And they're like, oh my God, you see this and that and this and that. And like literally, you open YouTube or Twitter or something and there's a new AI app to do something obscure. Yeah. And I said, hold on a second. I said, here's the life cycle that it's going to have. You're going to have all these independent little apps. Bigger companies will start to gobble them up, which it's already starting to happen. But what they're now doing is creating APIs so that you can plug everything together. And it's still going to be a kind of a bird's nest. And that's kind of where we're at. You can, if you know what you're doing, plug things together into make your own system. But it's still taking a while before we have an OS. And it's funny you're mentioning, I just use ChatGPT for everything. And for the most part, I'm very much the same way. And it's funny how all the browsers are now like, we've got plugins for everything, AI thing, every AI tool you need. We've got plugins for that. But when do the plugins turn into mature apps and make the browser obsolete?
Yeah, we're still waiting for that, aren't we? It's funny. I expected more by now, but I don't think it's going to be a huge problem in terms of all the different AI solutions because they'll just talk to each other, right? That's one of the beauties about this new tech is that you don't need someone to code up the API. Like I read about the people making plugins for ChatGPT, which I don't use many of them, mainly because of the discoverability thing, right? their interface is not good. Like, it's browsing them is awful. And really, you need to subscribe to the mailing list to figure out which ones to even use. But yeah, like the fact that the plugin authors just like basically describe how to use the API, and that's it. You don't really have to do any code. So I think I see you getting there. I think, like, Apple at some point are going to like bake it into all their devices, and that's going to be a huge thing.
Yeah, we always have to wait for Apple to make sure to say it's okay, right? Meanwhile, the rest of the world has been doing glue and duct tape and their own stuff at home or by themselves for years. It's kind of ironic and funny. But
Apple's ecosystem is tough to beat. Like, Google can't, Google want to, Microsoft want to. Yeah, people who have Apple devices have them all, and then so when Apple adds something, you got it on everything. And so, like, I have an iPhone, I've got a Mac. When they bake that AI layer into the operating system itself, and then all the apps just talk with that. And of course, like, the devices, some of the best for AI at their cost level. They've been building that machine learning chip into them for years. It's going to be interesting, and like, they obviously are going to take their time over it. I was kind of surprised they even bothered with the mixed reality glasses, considering what's going on this year, but they did. And that one's a bit strange in terms of where they exactly see that going. You know, it's too expensive, obviously, so.
Yeah, and it's really for the developer community to really give them a test bed to see if they're going to start to dream up new products and experiences with it. I think it's kind of cool. I think it's really cool. Let's put it that way. But in terms of the curve, innovation and adoption curves, I think it's a long ways off. $3,000+ for a headset. Interesting when I can almost do the same thing with a Samsung phone or another phone.
Well, I'm sure it'll be next level, but
I know.
Next level in terms of watching movies and having interactive FaceTime videos, like, because that was all that they did, right? Taking pictures, which was weird, watching movies. Yeah, so it's definitely cool tech, and they see there being a future there, right? But like, it's definitely not going to be mass adoption until it's tiny. People don't want to walk around with headsets on. Even if the work environment will be better.
Yeah, I think it's a hint that work environments probably will be 50% remote. That'll be a normal thing for a lot of people. So, hey, that makes sense. I mean, a lot of it makes sense. They make beautiful products. But hey, you never know what happens with these things. And, I always look at Samsung. They're always like literally years ahead of them. I think from a technology standpoint, what you brought up, Max, before, as far as an ML chip in a dedicated ML chip in a phone, that's a game changer. One of the things much like that, which I was very interested last year, they started promoting it, was Solana's mobile phone, their crypto phone. I thought that was really interesting, baked in hardware and specialized software that ran in tandem to offer users real security, wallet security, out and about when you're out and about. That's really cool.
Yeah, they're trying to push the boundaries for sure, and good on them for the attempt. I think phones are super difficult to crack. You got your two pillars. Of course, it's Android underneath, so we'll see. Like, it would have been.
Yeah.
I don't know. I just feel like it would be better if it was mostly software, and then they did sell a phone, and you could use it. But
yeah, I think having dedicated hardware and stuff like that is going to pose some challenges. And the optimal word you brought up was attempt.
Well, someone's got to push the boundaries. Otherwise, we never get anywhere.
I spoke with Vibhu Norby from the CEO of Solana Spaces, I don't know, 6 months ago. And, we were hot on Solana Spaces. There's one in New York, there's Texas, LA, wherever. Fantastic experience just for spending money, crypto money, or Sol. And really great experience. And I kept bringing up the phone. And he's like, well, it's coming. And that's all they could say. And, you do have to give them props for trying. That's a real challenger brand, and not just within the Web3 or blockchain space. That is a challenger to Apple, Samsung, Huawei, whoever else.
Yeah,
so
as I say, it's very, very difficult to really challenge, but they've certainly got the gumption to do it. And good on them for not releasing it in a hurry. When it's done, that's the right attitude, as long as you can afford that. A Tea cannot afford that. We have to be out within our burn, obviously, or we'd raise again. But they can, and so they should.
Yep. Software, you always have to deliver, right? There's always someone watching. On a broader topic, and we touched on this a little bit before, we've spoken with tons of Web3 companies and developers and CEOs across the web. And for many years, we've been hearing really fascinating stories about how they deal with their quote-unquote workforce, if you will. Do you have any interesting techniques? There's code reviews, bug bounties, there's and beyond. How do you democratize that scenario? You touched on it a little before, but how do you do that?
Well, I feel that open source was the original DAO. We were doing things in a decentralized, remote fashion before Web 2. And I learned quickly with Homebrew how to manage a community so that it works, despite the fact that you're not face to face, and despite the fact that the incentives are not always clear. And certainly using the tools effectively. You couldn't have done it without GitHub for all the aggro they get nowadays. Because it's a different company for sure to the one I remember in 2008 and 9. They really nailed the interface and the idea of how to do code socially, and they came at it from open source first, right? That was where it came from. I feel so much of modern software doesn't realize it, but we designed the systems everyone's using when we were building open source. All the stuff that's so essential nowadays, continuous integration. That was some random blog post back in 2010 or something that I read. Someone trying to do it for open source. The community is so key with all these things. They take the project to the next level. It doesn't matter how good the idea is, if you don't nurture that community and understand how to work with them, even though they're going to be in different time zones, different places, different rates of work even. And sometimes you have to finish the work for them, because that's open source at least. Right, in terms of my company, we're a commercial open source company, COSS, which of course is a relatively new concept. It didn't used to be possible to raise money and do open source. The VCs would go, what? You're going to give away the code? How's that going to work? Times have certainly changed. And, we're remote. We're decentralized. We're all over the world, different time zones. Philippines is the hardest one. He's going to bed as we're getting up.
Yeah, true. But yeah, ultimately, there are systems that run basically autonomously, right? So I've talked to other protocols that have, they've tokenized their whole model, and, bug bounties, code reviews, it's all gamified, and you're issued a score. Most people don't want to even give you their names. They don't want you to know where they live. and they only accept crypto, which is kind of fun and cool.
It's a good, it's how like back when I first got into open source, I didn't know who anyone was. All I knew was their alias. I didn't know where they lived, and it didn't matter. That's not important. Like during Web 2, we forgot about the importance of decentralizing, because that's what we were trying to do back with the original internet, and then lead up to Web 2. And then we got so carried away with like the power of centralization that now we've given up all our power to Microsoft and Facebook and Google and everybody else. It's
that's kind of profound, and it's kind of a big deal. That statement is a really big deal. It's a lot of what this podcast is about, and it's about removing yourself from the shackles or the cages that you've been put into. It's interesting because it took crypto. I'm not an economist. I'm not an analyst in any way. That's why I never give, I'll give friends and family crypto advice on investing. And sometimes we talk about it on the channel, but I make sure that you understand that that's not the cloth I'm cut from. Do not take it as, gospel. But I think it took crypto for me to understand how poorly our global economies are set up and architected. So, and it's not just me now, it's everyone else is looking at global financial collapses in the US, central bank in the US, the UK, Brex, everything. Across the world, everything is changing. And I think people are changing their minds and shifting. Centralization breeds destruction. It breeds chaos and theft in many cases. Can it work? Yes. But if there are no validators, unbiased validators in between two parties, it really won't work. So it's interesting to see people's minds change from a financial standpoint, and we'll start to see them we are seeing it happen in social media. Wait a minute. Cambridge Analytics, Zuckerberg sold my information to Cambridge Analytics. I didn't even know they were partnered with them. I didn't even know they could do that. Says everyone in the world. And then you get pissed. And then no one uses your product because you stole. It's interesting how the whole open source world, I think, will have it is actually having a very big renaissance. And I think that's amazing. It's fantastic.
It's a powerhouse that has been building and building, and it's more important than ever. Open source is, by its nature, just this intrinsically evolutionary thing. Like, people release little tools out there that do something important, and if it's good, people grab hold of them and they shove them in the stack of software, and it becomes like a part of the internet that just can't disappear. We're really peaking right now, but it just can't be stopped. That's the thing. It's just like Bitcoin, right? You just can't stop open source. Microsoft tried so damnedly they did in like the early 2000s to kill it with fear, uncertainty, and doubt, suing different open source projects and things like that. It's remarkable how they've turned around. Like, now they're big into open source, right? But it will just keep on going, and you can't stop it. So if governments try, they'll fail. I'd love for governments to try and stop some of these projects, and then for the open source community to write in something to the licenses which says this government is forbidden from using this open source, and seeing how that like cascades. Like, I'm sure the US government would like to think that they don't use much open source, but the reality is that they probably use a hell of a lot more than they realize. We hold a lot of power. It's just a matter of taking it.
Yeah, well, we'll see how Microsoft and some of the the big boys out there handle this. Because at the end of the day, if you're a futurist, and you don't even have to be a futurist, many developers, and myself and others, are like, well, why do I have to use Windows 10 or 11? Like, you'll just go on, you'll just get an internet connection and then download a piece of software or something that just runs, you build your own OS that works for you. If you're a video editor, you might need something different. If you're a developer, you might have a more lean down operating system, so you run faster and smoother, or you're running machine learning or something like that locally. You build your own operating system. We're starting to see that already on Web3, and the future is near.
It's very sensible. I used to be a Linux head. I was a Windows person before that. Like, I was in the UK and there was a computer called the BBC Micro that I used. Then I switched to Linux, and then I switched to Mac, and now I got friends who were Mac and switched back to Linux, and I can see that it's possible to go back to it again now. Like, things have advanced enough, and I would love to start building out my own. Like, if when Tea protocol is working and successful, I would love to spin off a department to make a new Linux Sheen, the desktop environment. It's always been a long-term thing I would like to have done.
Yeah, that sounds. And I know I've run Linux myself for various reasons. In the past, I started with Mac in college, went to PC for gaming for a while. It was hybrid. And then finally, about 3 years ago, I switched all my devices over to Android and PCs. It was just easier. It was open. There was more options, more customization. You can run them faster, longer, and frankly, you can build them. So I built mining rigs, and that's a lesson in flexibility. When a company puts specialized screws in their aluminum cases so you can't open them up, that's a red flag for me. That, like, the right to repair. Right to repair is a huge deal for me. Let me fix my own computer. Give me the instructions. Again, hermetically sealed. Everything, psychologically and physically, everything is sealed. And that gets back to the open source discussion of people are, for years, yourself and others have put their egos aside and said, I want to contribute to something bigger than myself. That is owned by really no one, or a DAO, maybe. Who knows?
Like, I have to confess, I have some ego in it. But mostly I was drawn in by the community of open source. That's what drew me in the first place. Still Linux, got involved in a bunch of open source there, and that's what's so great about it. The only reason I ever switched to Mac is because it was Unix underneath, and I appreciated the Apple design choices. I still do, but Apple's not the same company as it was. Not just because Jobs died, but I actually worked at Apple for a year, which is a good story in itself. But while I was there, I learned that the amount of people who worked there had gone up by 15 times since Steve Jobs died. Even you can't keep a company culture in the same spirit with that size of scale over such a short amount of time, and it shows. They make a lot of weird decisions nowadays that turn you off to a certain extent. And so this is why I have a lot of friends who switched to Mac in 2008-ish, like I did, and have now switched back to Linux. Linux has advanced a long way in the meantime, of course, but it's still there's a few apps that I'd miss from Mac, but most of the things I use are cross-platform nowadays, and that's why Tea, the CLI and the GUI, they're cross-platform. I wanted a tool that if I did want to switch back to Linux, it would be the same. And it doesn't work properly with Windows yet. It doesn't work properly with Windows Native, but it works with WSL. But making it work with Windows Native is on my to-do list. It just makes sense for me that the fruits of open source need to be available to you, whatever you're using. So from the get-go, it was built to be extendable to operating systems and platforms that we haven't even considered yet. Well, while I was at Apple, someone told me that Apple tried to get the Lightning cable made into the USB cable. Right? They proposed it to the standards body. They designed it for it to be that, which makes sense to me because they don't want something that's different. Even though everyone thinks that they love their proprietary this and that and the other, like they want their moats. They felt they had enough. I could believe that they would have given away that cable, but apparently the body didn't choose it, so they just decided to use it themselves.
Yeah, definitely odd hardware and software design decisions for sure. I've been I still love Apple. Don't get me wrong. You know, my family runs a lot of Apple products. We still have a lot of Apple products, but you know, when you remove the audio jack, that really pissed a lot of people off. It sounds so stupid, but it actually is a big deal. And phones are small enough and they're robust enough that you can fit a lot of these extra ports and hardware, IOs on it. So, you know.
They did it for 15% extra battery, of course, but 15% still doesn't make it last as long as people need. Like, I've missed my Nokia that would last a week. Like, I call it battery anxiety. That we just have so many devices that are always running out of battery, and there's some part of us that's always like, oh God, I got to charge this and I got to charge that. With these headphones, I've got to charge the bloody headphones every couple of days, and my laptop and my phone and my watch, my wireless mouse.
Yeah.
I'm fed up with it.
Yeah.
Right. So I get it, 15% extra battery, but it's not enough. I want a week of battery. So if you're not going to give me a week of battery, like, why are you taking away the headphone jack?
Yeah.
Like, is that really worth it?
Yeah. The balance is a little off for sure. But
maybe like Samsung then copied, right?
Yeah.
It's like all the Android phones did the same after making fun of it. So there must be something there. I don't know what it is exactly.
Well,
it
Samsung
is a big port, relatively.
Yeah. But Samsung, they make a lot of the parts for Apple, right? The screens, some of the batteries. Samsung is like, I'm into EV transportation, more or less like e-skateboarding and stuff like that. Samsung, all the high-end boards are all Samsung batteries, the ones that don't catch on fire, knock on wood. But they're just, everyone thinks, oh, the Samsung S23 whatever Ultra, this flagship phone. No, that's like a drop in the bucket for them. That's nothing. The phone is like advertising. That's about it. Everything else, like these high performance, LCD screens and the Rhino glass and the batteries and some of the circuitry is really where they shine and what actually keeps them ahead of everyone. But that we digressed a little bit there. Before we wrap up, Max, and I really appreciate your time. I'm really enjoying this conversation. What else do you want us to know about Tea?
So we're going to have our incentivized testnet later this year. We're hoping to show the open source community with that, like how effective the Tea protocol can be. And it'll be a lot of fun to onboard. We've spent a lot of time on the onboarding process and what we're building out that exists on the web. So, if you know open source developers or are one yourself, definitely come to our website, sign up the mailing list so you get notified when it goes out. And as I say, it's incentivized, so there is something in it for you to participate. And generally just spread the word. Like, this is going to change the nature of open source in a way that's positive. Like, we spent so much time designing it to make sure it doesn't change like the good parts of open source and only changes like the parts that are problematic. But I sincerely hope that once this thing is live, developers who currently like have to choose between open source or a full-time job can change that. And developers that maybe have never even considered open source but have some ideas, because everyone's got an idea or two, maybe you could even like find a way to not have to do that, you know, job for Facebook. I think it's ridiculous that some of our most talented engineers in the world like spend their time tweaking ad algorithms and like making like dopamine hits that are destroying our teenage youth mental health. It's not a good use, and open source is an incredibly good use of anyone's intellect. Like, you are literally making the world a better place. So yeah, we're hoping that we can make it so it's properly incentivized. So yeah, Tea.xyz is our website. Come on, sign up for the mailing list, and while you're there, check out the package manager, because it's great. I made homebrew, and over the years I always had these ideas for how to make something better, but I didn't want to go back. Like, God, it was so much work, and I'm just remembering now like how much work it is to like manage all the open source that exists. But put all the ideas in, and it's a really nice piece of software. You should check it out.
We certainly will, and we encourage our viewers and listeners to check it out, Tea.xyz. Max, do you have a Discord channel or a Telegram channel that you want to promote?
Yeah, we got a Discord. It's on the website. Seems
sure.
Like, you know, I don't remember
I'll put
the
in the link.
Unique ID of it. So
I'll
yeah,
link
check
it
us out.
below.
We've got Twitter as well, and yeah, that's the main ones.
Yeah, you know, for everyone listening, check them out. You know, the founders of Brew are now with Tea, and really interesting open source project, not just from a product standpoint, from a whole ecosystem end of things. They're starting to figure out a lot of the, not just the technical limitations and or advancements within a piece of software, but the whole ecosystem, and that includes human beings. So really interesting product. We'll be checking you out more. Max, thank you so much. Everyone check them out.
Great. Thank you very much, Rich.
Thanks, Max.